非常感谢两位的分享。那第二个环节呢，就我们题目叫在不平的世界中寻找机会。为什么起这个题目呢？大家知道，就是在这个冷战结束以后呢，这个弗里德曼就是《纽约时报》的这个专栏作家写过一本书，叫《世界是平的》。那现在看起来，这个世界不仅不是平的哈，而且还是充满了这个崎岖和这个转弯。那么呢，很明显这个判断呢，在当下的世界中是不对的。那么，所以呢，我们的题目叫在不平的世界中，但是是不是没有机会呢？肯定也不是。那么，所以我们在不平的世界中寻找机会呢，下面我们就会请到财新国际的副总经理李真兴先生负责主持这一场，有请真兴。
So, good morning. In this session, we are very honored to have Dr. Philipp Rösler, a former Vice Chancellor of Germany, and Professor Marcos Troijo, former Deputy Economy Minister of Brazil and former President of the NDB, joining us on the stage, please. All right, thank you both for coming and joining. Just as Shen said, this session, we call it Seeking Opportunities in the Uneven World. So the theme has suggested that there will be setbacks, there will be fluctuations and bumpy roads ahead. However, even in such times, there must be ways to iron out or at least mitigate the torrents and set our eyes straight toward sustainable development for the common good of billions. So we are really fortunate to have both of you here, as you both have managed your own country's economy, trade, technology policies, while also playing major roles on the global stage. So first, we will hear your thoughts in speeches before we move to discussions. Dr. Rösler, your turn first.
Open market, free trade, and fair competition. These are the three pillars of growth, jobs, and global prosperity. Dear moderator, dear Marcos, ladies and gentlemen, I grew up with this wisdom when I was a politician. And I mention this because in today's time of rising populism globally, this wisdom is under threat. And we have seen it recently. You can win elections by fighting on a popular way against global trade, free trade, and globalization. You can easily say that global trade will destroy jobs, so let's stop global trade. This sounds very simple, but it's not. It's not simple, it's not smart, it's not right, it's simple stupid. However, people tend to believe this. They don't have any trust in global trade, in open markets. And the reason is that we have to fight for fair competition. Only if we can gain trust back into fair competition globally, we can gain back trust into globalization in global trade. And yeah, there are some institutions already around who have a mission to fight for fair competition on a global level. The WTO, for example. But who trusts the WTO in today's time? And we have just seen an election in the US. And one of the results, among many others, might be that we even see more retraction of the United States of America in international institutions, in international bodies. So let's not wait of the United States or any others. Let's take our own responsibility. Let's fight for a clear system which is rules-based. Only the rules and the legal framework in a global agreement can guarantee sort of trust and fair competition on a global level. And it's not that difficult. We all know and we all have in mind some clear rules for fair competition. We all know what does it mean to have unfair tariffs. But not only tariffs, and we will have the discussion soon, I assume, but also non-tariff barriers are quite important. Quite often, regions, even countries, try to bring in their own political philosophy thanks to non-tariff barriers. They set standards. They might be applicable in their own country, in their own region, but they might not be feasible globally. And if you would like to have a global system, you must have fairness for all the different players across the world, and not only one specific standard based on your own ideas and values. I'm here for global neighbors. We are fighting for global cooperation. And one great place would be the WTO, a global trade system, rules-based, guaranteeing open market free trade thanks to a fair system. So this is my message for today. Let's fight for such an institution, for such a rule-based free trade, open market, and fair competition. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning. Shuli, Jovanka, Philip, Lee, great pleasure to be here with my fellow board members of Global Neighbors. You know, economists and philosophers, political scientists are always trying to capture with one sentence the spirit of the times, or like my German-speaking friends like to call it, the Zeitgeist. And throughout the past 20 years, many different concepts were voiced. The age of turbulence, the age of resilience, the time of the tribes. The world is flat, as Shen put it, reminding us of the work that appeared 20 years ago by the New York Times journalist Thomas Friedman. But if we are to try to describe where the opportunities are today, I think it would be particularly relevant to realize that if in the world is flat scenario, the airplane where hyperglobalization was flying, if you looked at the cockpit, it was all about efficiency. It was efficiency that was in command of the hyperglobalization airplane. If you look at the airplane today, if you look at the cockpit today, I'm not saying efficiency is no longer there. Efficiency continues to be very important. But there's something else that's in command, and that is geopolitics. Geopolitics has become so important in this post-flat world, in this uneven world that the title of our session describes, that I think that in the same way economists in the past have subdivided their science in microeconomics, which focuses on the individual and the firms, and macroeconomics that focuses on mostly the big economic aggregates. For us to understand where the opportunities lie going forward, it is also relevant for us to understand that there are micro geopolitics, and micro geopolitics are made up of events that are very consequential, but that actually take place in a shorter span of time. So, for example, the election of Donald Trump in the United States is a micro geopolitical event. The hotspot in the Middle East, even the war in Ukraine, these are micro geopolitical events. And I'm not saying that they're not key. They are very important. And for us to look at opportunities, we have to consider them as well. But the bigger opportunities lie in the macro geopolitical trends. Macro geopolitical trends have to do with tectonic shifts that will, in a major way, shape the world over the next 25 years. So I'm just going to mention 4 of those dynamics that I think are particularly central to those that, with a good faith, want to shape the world for the better. So the first one, the first macro geopolitical trend that we have going has to do with demographics, because everyone is very worried that, you know, there are aging populations, birth rates in many countries of the world are declining, and it is true. I mean, if you're walking in New York and you're walking past the United Nations headquarters, you look at that building on First Avenue, there are 193 countries represented at the UN today. And over the next 25 years, it is true that we are going to see population decline in 184. So more than 90% of the world's more than 90% of the world's countries today will experience some sort of population decline. Nonetheless, the population expansion in 9 countries over this next 25 years will be so dramatic that at the end of the cycle, you're going to end up aggregating an extra 2 billion people to the planet. Now, 2 billion people is a lot of people. It's like thinking of a spacecraft that comes onto planet Earth and deposits another China in the world, another United States in the world, another Russia in the world, another Germany in the world. That's 2 billion people total. So from this dynamics alone, very important questions for the opportunities that lie ahead come to mind. Where is the world's water going to come from? Where is the world's food going to come from? Where is the world's energy going to come from? What are the elements that will allow for a more fluent transition to a green economy? By the way, just to single out those 9 countries where we are going to see this major demographic expansion, we're talking about India, that, as everyone knows, has overtaken China as the world's most populous country. We're talking about Pakistan. We're talking about Indonesia. That's edging close to 300 million people. We are going to see some marginal populational increase in the United States. And the other 5 countries belong to sub-Saharan Africa: Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, Congo, and Nigeria. Now, these demographic changes alone do not really capture the macro geopolitical opportunities, because you have to sort of cross that trend with another movement that's very strong. And that has to do to trying to answer the question, where is the world's growth, economically speaking, going to come from? And then if you take into account the so-called G7, right, which today in purchasing power parity terms represent about a combined GDP of $50 trillion, they're going to have, the G7 is going to have a smaller and smaller piece of the global GDP pie going forward. Whereas the E7, the biggest 7 emerging economies of the world, so China, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Mexico, will have a bigger and bigger slice of the global GDP pie. The third dynamics that's particularly important has to do with the redesign of global value networks. It's something that goes beyond supply chains. So it's not only supply chains that are relocating, or textile or garment industries that are leaving China and going to Bangladesh, or Thai companies that are redistributing their productive hubs to countries like Vietnam or India. It's something that's a little deeper. For example, even when you're talking about liquidity sources or sources of foreign direct investment, yes, Europe is very important. Yes, North America is very important. But look at what's happening in the Middle East. Look at this extraordinary renaissance of countries like Saudi Arabia, which is perhaps one of the nations in the world to gain the most from this new geopolitical reordering of things. So we have to absolutely be mindful about how global value networks are being redesigned, and it's shaking our traditional consideration of what the International Division of Labor means. And then the fourth dynamic that I think is particularly relevantly has to do with the marriage between talent and AI. Because I think everyone in this auditorium agree that human capital, talent, is perhaps the single most important factor of production. But the way you thought about talent in the past is also being reshaped by augmented intelligence. And one of the most consequential results that you have from this marriage or this divorce between talent and artificial intelligence will be felt in the concept of ESG. Because so far we have been very focused on the first letter of the concept, on E, environment. So you have the COP conference, you have the United Nations entirely focused on climate change and environmental degradation. And obviously our lives depend upon the environment. So yes, let us focus on that. But let us not forget the letter S in ESG, which stands for social. Because if you are an individual in what today you consider to be a developing country, and you reach the age of 30, 35, without the necessary hours and practices of skilling, reskilling, upskilling, instruction that will allow you to use artificial intelligence tools to be productive in this new phase of the global economy, you're going to be out of the marketplace for a long time. So this balance between the micro geopolitical developments and the longer term macro geopolitical trends, as I see it, as a consequence, will also redesign the way we think about advanced economies and emerging economies. So today, for example, we talk about the G7 and the E7. Going forward, I think our notions of global north and global south will be shaken. If we put the G7 and E7 together, you have the 14 biggest economies of the world. So as a reference to this geopolitical changes, I think you're going to have the D7 countries that are going down, that are either going to be caught in inertia or that will face decline over this next quarter century. Or you're going to have the U7, countries that are going up as a consequence of competitively adapting to this uneven world landscape. Who is going to be in the U7? I think China is going to be in the U7. I think India is going to be in the U7. I think the United States is going to be in the U7. I think Saudi Arabia is going to be in the U7. So we have 4 seats already taken in the House. There are 3 more, and the competition is open. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for this fascinating speech and ideas. So actually, Dr. Rossler, Philip, you are saying that as long as, if we can make competition fair, actually that could be also be accepted by the general population and supportive by them. And Professor Troijo, Marcus, you are saying along these mega trends, there are opportunities and the things we have to do. But before we are going to the longer term, let's come back to the shorter term again. So the US election again. Yesterday, people were talking about China-US relations a lot, but today we want to hear from you, what does that mean for Germany, for Europe, and for Brazil, or for Latin America, or the global South?
I think Europe and the rest of the world missed, to some extent, the chance in the first term of President Trump, because everyone was saying, oh, now it's the right moment to become more self-responsible and to go our own way, not waiting for the US. We have to become more independent. Nothing has happened that much. So now it's another opportunity to give it a try. I think, as mentioned even before, they will not that be engaged in the international bodies. This is not only WTO, it's even UN, it's even MOAs and other things. So that means we have to fill the gap. There is never a free seat in politics, neither on a local level nor on a geopolitical level. So I think we have to take responsibility in all the different bodies. We have to create our own opinion, our own additional partnerships and friendships even. I think this is the main message. We should not wait for others. We should become adult and independent. And I think this is a great opportunity to do so.
So what will Europe do in that?
I mean, currently we are only looking to the US, what happens there, and of course the development, for example, in digitalization is still there, no doubt. But at the same time, we should seek for, as mentioned, additional partners, for example, in trade, for investment. And I think this is one thing. The other thing is, even in political or geopolitical terms, look around. As Marcos mentioned, there are so many other regions than only US, Europe and China. So we can go to Africa, we can look at ASEAN, South America. I think there's a lot to do. And I think this is a message now to look around, to identify the right partners and maybe in the future friends.
No, I think it's interesting because the world has become more complicated, but it's become bigger in a major way, right? I mean, for example, you look at infrastructure in different parts of the globe. You look at infrastructure in South America. Dams and railroads and irrigation projects are being financed by countries like the UAE and Qatar. You think of a country like Uruguay, right, the neighboring country of Brazil. In the past, it was all about trying to conquer the Brazilian market. Now Uruguay is about to conclude a deal with China. And depending on how things go, Uruguay will be on the way to becoming a country with the nominal GDP per capita as wealthy as New Zealand. You think of a country like Brazil, for example. I left college and went straight into the diplomatic service. And at the time, we always saw the European Union as the most important prize to conquer when it comes to international trade. But there was just so many restrictions for our agricultural goods that in the early 2000s, it was cheaper for a French supermarket to buy a business class ticket for a cow and put her in the São Paulo airport in that business class and fly her to Paris than to actually finance the cow in the French territory itself. So that was a big obstacle to Brazil's trade expansion. But then you have the rise of China. And if you think of a country like China that 22 years ago had a GDP the size of Italy and today is a $19 trillion economy, when you grow as fast in such a short period of time from such a low GDP per capita basis, people eat more, people consume more calories. And today, you have this dramatic expansion of Brazil-China trade. I always like to give this number because I think it's very impressive. 22 years ago, Brazil-China trade was $1 billion a year. Today, Brazil-China trade is $1 billion every 55 hours. So, once again, the world is very big. And if there is one effect that the Trump presidency might have these next 4 years, is that it will bring other regions of the world closer together, right? I was the chief negotiator on behalf of South America in the deal that we were trying to strike with the EU 5 years ago. I think this is very much back on the table because of the geopolitical scenario. I think closer and closer relations between, for example, Southeast Asia and the Middle East, it's something that's also registering on the radar screen. The world will regroup. I think Shan, when he was presenting his talk, he somewhat made a reference, an indirect reference to the clash of civilizations. What we are going to see over the next couple of years is a clash of globalization. So there was a US-led globalization, as Philip was mentioning in his remarks. Most probably the United States is going to retreat from globalization. The US is going to hide away from globalization. But something will happen in its place. So there's another wave of globalization coming from different sources, from Southeast Asia, from the Middle East, from hopefully from Europe, that will also bring about opportunities.
So actually, both of you are saying that this world will be regrouping and more, say, like partners and groups into. So we are not aiming at a one-piece global system like the WTO or things like that anymore, right? But that's the second best, maybe.
Now, at least you need a sort of framework in which you can find the different friends and allies, right? And so WTO is not a wonderful body, right? But you need a legal framework which guarantees the, again, fair market environment, and then you can find in this fair market environment your best friends and business partner. So this could be the beginning. I would not say that you need such a body, but you need at least this market environment, and also the bigger, the better. Because the trend currently is going to bilateral free trade agreements, which is nice for the partners, but it's always the second best solution only. Because better would be a multilateral and even global free trade agreement.
No, I am like Philip. I am like Philip, all for multilateralism, and I mean, I was the first Westerner to lead a multilateral institution headquartered in Asia. But some multilateral institutions do need modernization. Even the WTO, for example, if you want to have any kind of agreement at the WTO level, you need universal acceptance, and you have almost 150 nations represented there. It's not going to happen. I mean, if 150 people start talking where they're going to have dinner tonight, they're not going to go anywhere because no one is going to be in full agreement. So there's a governance aspect that has to be reformed. You look at the United Nations, for example, the representativeness of the Security Council is a reflex of what the world looked like back in the second half of the 1940s. The world has completely changed, so why don't you reform that governance as well? In the meantime, I think that what's most pragmatic is, as Philip said, both bilateral and plurilateral agreements. Like-minded countries that engage in common and shared interests, common values, might be those that get closer together, at least in this cycle, where the necessary time and effort will not go into reshaping the big multilateral institutions that we know.
Yeah, Philip has been stressing clearer standards, clear standards, clear rules, rules-based systems. But frankly, when we talk about the new areas like the green industries, green manufacturing, environmental protection techniques and things, actually, even in Europe, there is not a united voice. Some countries are more aggressive on taking this. For example, on lithium batteries. Actually, a lot of Chinese investors they are confused. Where should we put our factories in, and should we expand our investment there or pull out? Recently, there are some companies pulling out of Europe. So how can you make this unified, clear standards within your own borders?
Now, first, to be very honest, they have to do their homework, means the European Union, right? I mean, because it's unfortunately not only the lithium industry which is looking to Europe and is a sort of confused, but all the other investors are currently looking there. And the reason is relatively simple, because they are so inwards oriented currently. They don't realize that there is even a region outside the European Union and partners. And what do they want? They want clarity. They want stability, and not on the political level. They want stability in the legal framework they will invest into it, right? And if it changes every year following every trend, then you don't have stability. It's not reliable. So then you won't invest. Investment, it's a long-term issue, and you cannot do it short-term and change every legislative. So this is the first rule. Come to stability, and stability means more than having a rules-based system than 4 years or one legislative. This is one thing. The other thing is, as you mentioned, if an organization like WTO or others will find a global system, for example, tariffs, we should not forget, as mentioned, the non-tariffs, because they try to push in and tweak in quite often their political ideas.
Yes.
It's not an economic approach, it's a political approach. They want to even to lecture other regions how to do business. And how they do it, they say, okay, we can only buy products if they are produced on this or that way.
Yeah.
Which is a nice approach, a nice idea, but it's not working in a globalized world.
So, yeah, and also, Marcus was also talking about ESG, about environment. So the thing is, in many fields, actually, Chinese manufacturers or technologies have an upper hand, right, as of now. Last year, actually, the Chinese EV export to Brazil doubled, tripled, quadrupled, actually. So in a way that if you allow these technologies coming in, actually this is good for your own decarbonization efforts. But on the other hand, you have your manufacturing bases, you have your industrialization efforts. So for a country, how to, balance into these two things? Marcus first, maybe.
It's an evolutionary process, so it's not like you're turning off your brown manufacturing and turning on your green manufacturing, but in many areas there will be convergence. For example, we all know how energy-hungry artificial intelligence, data centers, and even cryptocurrencies are. The other day I was coming across some staggering numbers. For example, in terms of crypto. If you take into account the 50 biggest countries in the world in terms of energy consumption, if crypto was a country, crypto will be the 27th biggest consumer of energy. Cryptocurrencies today in the world consume more energy than a country like Pakistan, right? Same thing goes for AI. It's very energy hungry. And then you have these very advanced technologies that are around data centers and AI. And you have countries like Argentina, or Colombia, or Brazil, where there's a major abundance of water, right? As a consequence, a very important concept may surface, which is green artificial intelligence, where you use renewable sources from hydro, from solar, to power data centers and to power the way forward towards AI. So we have a convergence here that blends together the old Ricardian world of comparative advantages to the late technology world of AI. There are other solutions in, for example, the emerging world that have, before it was conceptualized, actually brought biomanufacturing forward. Look, for example, the case of ethanol in Brazil. I mean, Brazil has had a viable urban mobility project based upon sugarcane ethanol that's been going on very successfully now for more than 40 years. So once again, there are opportunities out there. I would say that the biggest challenge is not necessarily in how green the technology is, but how adaptable your workforce, your human capital is to these new ways of producing, right? Because if you're not skilling your population, if you're not skilling your labor force for this green intensive, yet AI intensive economy, then you have a problem.
Yesterday we had a lot of topics on Chinese companies going overseas, and as both of you have said, that this regrouping or getting bigger from smaller FTAs to bigger ones, actually we will see that trend going forward. I mean, Chinese companies going globally, but there are concerns, right? So whether it is national security or labor force or all this. So what are your advices for these companies going internationally to Europe, to the global south. Sometimes they are frustrated. What should we do? What should we do to convince you that we are here for your own good instead of, the things you are charging me?
Now, the short-term advice to these companies on a micro level would be then, if you are not welcomed in one region, don't care about this region, go to another region. But quite often we are talking now about European Union as this region who is not that much appreciated currently. So this is not my obvious interest. So again, coming back, if you have a fair system, then this fair system, everyone certainly has the right to grow and to sell their products. I mean, Germany is relatively small, right? 80 million people, or 85 now. So, but it's very successful globally. Why? Because it's an export market. Assume 1 second someone would have said, oh, Germany is not a good country, so we don't want to have their products. What would have happened to Germany, right?
Will it succeed in the future?
Exactly. So they were benefiting from the global trade system back then. And they should be fair and give others the same chance they had once as well. And the same for the entire European Union, by the way. It's not only Germany. So I think, again, this is not only economic theory, it's a necessity for global economy to come to a fair system in which everyone has the same chances, right? And then certainly you can say, if you don't have a fair system and everyone knows only one thing, that it's not fair, then it's easy to say, look, these products are not that good. The countries have maybe some, second agenda behind their products. But again, the only way is transparency, and again, open market, free trade, and fair competition. It sounds boring to some extent, and yes, if you go to WTO, I was living in Geneva for 4 years. I saw the neighbors down the lake. And I mean, it's not the people's mistake. No one is taking care. No one is engaging there. Because it's certainly frustrating to have hours and hours of negotiating, 30 hours, 40 hours in a row, only negotiations. But guess what? Better 30 hours negotiation than 30 million loss. And I think this should be in mind. And it needs some effort to come to this event. And it's in our interest, in your interest, to go global. You need a fair global environment. Otherwise, it's a nasty competition.
Just name a few things of being fair.
So that only performance counts, for example. This is one thing. Then the product don't have too much rules, as we just discussed, you would like to sneak in, like energy consumption, for example. We have in Europe, only in the European market, talking about data center, a very interesting rule, which means after 2027, every data center is only allowed to use renewable energy. That sounds very nice for the environment because it's, heavily consuming energy, but how will you run a data center 24/7 with renewable energy only? This is not feasible yet, but it's a rule. And it's put into play from politicians who have this in mind, oh, energy consumption is bad, we must find a way out. The goal is good, the way is not super smart. This is one thing, and this is where you have not a fair competition, because others have not these rules, and they can run the data center even with nuclear power or other things. But again, performance should count. No subsidies, we should discuss it, and not too many no-tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers. I think these are 3 examples where you can easily create this, and always to be on the same level playing field when it comes to trade and investment.
Yeah. Marcos, any advice for trade?
Only, I think what's happening, especially when it comes to China, is something, of course, on a bigger scale, but that also happened with Germany and Japan and even Korea, right? I mean, you become a trading nation, you become a trade powerhouse, your costs of production increase, particularly the remuneration of labor, and then you go global. You move from being a trading economy to become a network economy, and this is happening in China. By the way, just to give you a figure that depicts that situation, in 2006, everything that China imported, added to everything that China exported, represented 67% of China's GDP. Today, everything that China imports added to everything that China exports, that's 35% of China's GDP. So that is a major decline. Does that mean exclusively that China now relies on its own domestic market, or mostly on its domestic market for its economic expansion? No, because Chinese companies have gone global. So whatever BYD is producing in Brazil actually counts as Brazilian GDP. So it's a different kind of game. What I think is very, very important for China is to tell the story. China has to have its own narrative. It's always very reassuring for China when it goes to a foreign market to say, listen, we are here to partner with you, partner with local companies, improve the addition of value in that particular jurisdiction. China's soft power must come along with China's geoeconomic expansion, particularly corporate expansion. Don't take it for granted that the higher technology alone will be the most appealing. There has to be a story that comes along with it.
All right, I think clearer rules, better rules, fair competition, and telling the story, which is actually what we are doing here today. Thank you both for sharing for these excellent ideas and your deep thoughts. Thank you.